Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to wait 1 or 2 minutes until everyone can join. Hello, good afternoon to those of you who just joined. We're giving it just a minute more before we get started. Okay, we're going to get started. We are at, roughly 230 participants, so that's a good critical mass. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar to talk about VM42 and what we have planned for a major vision toward version 3.0. My name is Viridiana Alcantara Shivapatam. I'm manager in the agriculture innovation team at Verra, and I'm very happy to be joined today by Jacqueline Kachelmeyer, who works at TerraCarbon and is our main supporter for this revision. So let's look at the agenda. I'll first start with an introduction of how has the VM42 development been and the timelines for what we have planned. Jacqueline will then continue describing the major revision elements for version 3. And at the end, I will present some minor revision elements and talk some ideas through that we're still discussing. At the end, we have some time, maybe about 10-15 minutes for questions and answers. But yeah, we expect a lot of questions. Could be that we don't get to all of them. But the good thing about this revision that we're starting a very early broad consultation process. So there will be a lot of room to provide input in case you have concrete ideas or you want to share issues you've had with the methodology so far. So there will be plenty of opportunity to do that, even if we don't get to it at this webinar. Just a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and will be shared at the end of to your inboxes with an email, and it will also be available in the Verra YouTube channel. With that, I think we can get started. So just a short overview of VM42. Version 1 was active from October 2020 to May 2023. TerraCarbon was also involved in the original development, and it was led externally by Indigo Ag. In August 2022, we issued a minor clarifications document to clarify that soil organic carbon must always be monitored. And I think that was the main item. Version 2 has been active since May 2023. And we issued also corrections and clarifications to that version in January of this year. Recently, there was a public consultation for version 2.1, so that was a minor revision. Yeah, the consultation is now closed. It closed in May, and we expect to finalize answering the comments and addressing any last changes in the next quarter of this year. Yeah, this minor revision focus on the breakdown of reductions versus removals. That is something that we are doing overall in all VCS methodologies that have both components within one methodology. So that was like a portfolio driven revision. And it also embedded the corrections and clarifications from January. Sorry about, there's a mistake here, from January 2024. Yeah. Yeah, now in terms of process and timeline between, well, basically between version 2.1 and version 3, although we kind of started this major revision already before version 2.1 is published. Today we're at this yellow square stakeholder webinar and the launch of the pre-consultation. And based on that, we will draft the version 3 that will be out for public consultation toward the end of this year. After that, we need some time to solve all public comments, but we do expect, or that is our aim with the pre-consultation, to reduce the load of public comments by kind of addressing them already in the drafting. So hopefully that will work out. We rely, of course, on you providing all this input beforehand. As we saw with version 2, it is necessary to consult experts, and there's probably also a VBB assessment coming, although that could be that there are some changes to the methodology development process, but as is now, there is a VBB assessment planned. The final Verra approval, so we have several internal checks that need to happen before publication, and our aim is to have version 3 published in the first half of next year. So I think, yeah, with that, I pass it on to you, Jacqueline. I'm happy to move the slides.
Thank you. Great. Thanks. Happy to be here today to talk over some of the major elements of the revision that we are planning on getting into. As Viri said, our hope is to kind of present this at a high level today, some of the bigger questions and pieces of feedback that Verra has gotten that we're looking to resolve, but also to get your feedback on these before we come up with a fine-tuned sort of set of plan resolutions to these questions. So a lot of this will be kind of high-level, directional information, and we'll be looking to get opinions on these items. And a big focus is around sampling design guidance and some of the more quantification related parts of the methodology. So we'll start here, the first topic, which is quantification units and stratification. And our goal here is really to be able to provide more examples and more clear examples for how projects could determine project appropriate quantification units and strata in different contexts. Verra's received a lot of feedback and asking questions about this, and a lot of the examples and guidance in the methodology right now, croplands oriented and croplands in the US are similar contexts. So we're hoping to provide additional guidance and examples of how these concepts might be applied in different types of project contexts. And with that, we also want to address some questions that have come up about if strata can change over time. Should there be a minimum number of quantification units in strata that the methodology requires? So some of these sort of strata and quantification unit related questions fit under this broader topic. There's also, VM0042v2 introduced the QA2 approach of baseline control sites. There are some inconsistencies in the methodology of whether you're matching those control sites to the quantification unit or to the strata, given that stratified random sampling is the preferred sampling approach for VM42. We want to make sure that all of these elements are clear and consistent throughout the methodology. So we'll be incorporating those kinds of clarifications into the revisions as well. And I think that's the last bullet on this slide here, is just ensuring consistent, clear use of all of these terms throughout the methodology. Next slide, please. Here. So still on the topic of sampling design, another big question that Verra has been getting from stakeholders is, how many samples do I need to take for my project? And we're not going to be setting a minimum number of samples because it's very context dependent, but what we're looking to do is to offer more detailed guidance on how to determine the appropriate sampling density ex ante before you go out and invest in your sampling campaigns, and then ex post, when you're at a verification event, how to demonstrate that sufficient samples were indeed collected. So Verra, if you wouldn't mind, what this might look like is expanded guidance on what's in VM42 already. There is some information on reconnaissance sampling or other ways of kind of doing a power analysis or minimum detectable difference to get a ex ante estimate of how many samples you need to take. We want to kind of expand that out and give a little bit more guidance on different approaches and different types of data that could be used, from reconnaissance sampling, digital soil maps, or other available data to help project proponents have a better sense of how to have confidence that they're coming up with the right numbers in advance of the sampling campaign. Very next one, thank you. And so with that, get a good idea of expected heterogeneity in the project area, and ideally you're funneling that into a kind of a statistical test. And so we want to clarify when and how projects need to demonstrate that the sampling design will produce an adequate sampling density. That would be at validation, and then that the sampling density was sufficient to support verification claims at verification. So what this might look like, next bullet, would be to require the use of a statistical test to determine the appropriate sampling density, and to report what that test was and the results were in the PD for CVB review. So right now, minimum detectable difference is an option. It's not required, and I think what we're looking at is making something like that required, but that wouldn't necessarily be the only approach that a project could take. So we'd look to produce like a non-exhaustive list of statistical tests that could be used to show that the sampling density is likely robust enough upfront, and then show that it was indeed robust enough to have statistical power on the back end after sampling has occurred. Next slide, please. Another topic under the broader umbrella of sampling design is sampling allocation and sample allocation and remeasurement. Questions have come up around how to allocate samples across the project and within strata, and then also around remeasurement and if you're remeasuring at the same points or not. So we want to kind of develop these guidelines and some clarification on these topics. Next bullet, please, Verra. So the first one is just to clarify appropriate methods for sample allocation across and within strata. Is it proportional to area? Are there other approaches that are also on the table that would be robust? Mostly clarifying guidance, but we do have a specific point of feedback we're looking to get from stakeholders for VM42 on remeasurement requirements. So right now throughout the methodology, it's sort of implied, if not fully explicitly stated, that the assumption is you're revisiting the same sample points over time. And this is how the uncertainty reduction is essentially set up to compare SSD at specific points over time. And I think our question here is whether we should kind of take a prescriptive approach or a flexible approach in remeasurement requirements under VM42. A prescriptive approach would look like setting requirements around remeasurement that projects need to follow. This would allow the methodology to outline one size sort of fits all uncertainty calculation, knowing what the resampling campaign looks like. A more flexible approach would be to allow a range of remeasurement approaches that project proponents, could pick the remeasurement approach that is most appropriate for their project. So instead of revisiting the same point, maybe you're taking 2 independent samples at 2 different points in time. this would require different uncertainty calculations and different considerations about sampling density to ensure you have enough statistical power if you're sampling at different points over time. So I think we want to hear from stakeholders on what is the preference, more flexibility, but more onus on project proponents to be able to determine the rest of the kind of quantification elements, the uncertainty components, or something that's more prescriptive that makes it a bit easier to follow, but might not be as flexible for different contexts and considerations. Depending on how this revision goes, we want to address some discrepancies in the methodology between how sample data points for SOC are used in aggregation calculations and uncertainty calculations. As I mentioned, uncertainty calculations are on a point basis right now. Aggregation calculations will determine SOC change on an areal basis. So we have this question of mean difference versus difference means. What are we kind of comparing change in stocks against over time? So this is kind of an umbrella topic that we're looking for a lot of feedback on to help guide the methodology and kind of relate to each other as they unfold, where one set of revisions will influence the path that the other set takes. Thanks, Gary. Next one. On the subject of remeasurement, VM0042 v2 clarified how remeasurements are used for quantification approach 1 to do model true-up, that you're using these remeasurement data for SOC in addition to your validation data set to update your model prediction error terms. And there are some kind of follow-on questions that come from this concept of true-up that we're looking to clarify and to get feedback on as well. Here, if you wouldn't mind, the first bullet here. So as I mentioned, following model, to perform model true-up, you are using your remeasurement data, updating your model prediction error term, and then under V2, it now clarifies that you will rerun your model simulations for both the baseline and project scenarios from T0 to present day, applying your updated model prediction error term in your uncertainty deductions. And the question then comes, what happens when you learn from that you might have overestimated your SOC impacts due to too high of an uncertainty deduction or too low of an uncertainty deduction. And so we want to better understand, and here maybe add the third bullet here, we want to understand from you all what your perspectives are on what the implications of this better understanding, this true up and rerunning simulations to present day should be for VCU issuance. And then in addition, whether the purpose of remeasurement is solely to do this model true up and update of model prediction error term, or if it is also to compare model simulations to empirical data and see if they are aligned and that the model simulations are empirically supported. So yep, just to recap these two bullets here, looking for public feedback on how previous over or underestimations should affect VCU issuance, and to seek public feedback on the purpose of remeasurement under QA1. And just to tie it all together from the last few slides, just as with the question about remeasurement approaches and mean difference and difference of mean, we also, depending on the direction that these revisions go in based on public feedback, need to consider if the guidance for sampling design and sampling density need to be catered differently to QA1 versus QA2 if remeasurements serve different purposes under those different quantification approaches. Next slide, please. So shifting gears a little bit here away from some of our sampling design specific topics, we also want in the revisions to introduce the concept of a blended baseline. This would be an option that project proponents could choose to use when the crop rotation in the project scenario doesn't match the scheme of the historical look-back period. First bullet, please, Gary. So the current approach in VM42 is that a project crop year is compared to a specific crop year in the baseline scheduled activities. So you set your historical look back period, you collect your management data over that time, and you have this fixed schedule of activities that gets repeated. So you collect T-1, T-2, T-3, and then you model forward T-3, T-2, T-1, and so on. And the challenge here is that assumes that farmers are following a fixed crop rotation that might not be so rigid in reality due to market conditions or weather conditions. And in addition, the project activity itself might be introducing a whole new crop or changing crops that could lead to a mismatch that is kind of, comparing sort of apples and oranges in a way. And so the idea of a blended baseline is that instead of having this fixed rotation that is simulated, exactly as fixed, instead a project crop year is compared to the average of outcomes in the baseline scenarios across all crops and management activities in the historical look-back period. So you'd essentially model the rotation from different starting points to different crops that are occurring in each year of the simulations, and then you're averaging the output to get your baseline value. And it kind of reduces some of the noise and the fluctuations that could come for that, and give more of a less rigid baseline that is probably more reflective of real dynamics of business as usual conditions as well in the baseline scenario. And I think there's a last bullet here just to kind of recap that the fixed crop rotation is just maybe not fully representative of real world farming practices. So we want to try and give that flexibility and that optionality to project components to have this more averaging effect. It doesn't really change how you set the baseline. It really changes, your option for how you model the baseline using the same schedule of activities and historical look-back period you would have used, kind of regardless of whether you use the blended baseline approach. Okay, and I believe this is my last topic here. So most of you are probably familiar with the recent release of VM47, which is Verra's new afforestation, reforestation, and revegetation methodology. And that sort of replaced the reliance on the CDM-AR tool that is still referenced in VM42. And our goal with this revision would be to bring those two methodologies into closer alignment with each other from a quantification and MRV perspective. So we want to reference or incorporate the MRV and accounting methods underpinning VM47 census-based and area-based approaches, but we recognize that those were developed in the context of ARR projects, and so we would be incorporating or referencing these while also developing VM42 specific applicability conditions, guidance, and criteria that are suited to the agricultural context of VM42 projects. So this would also involve enhancing the guidance regarding setting a baseline for woody biomass accounting, because what we would be looking to do is remove reference to the CDM tool and instead beef up VM42's guidance on baseline setting and applicability conditions and all of these things, and then incorporate in the MRD components for VM47 and remove reference to the CDM tool. And related to this, what we've seen are a lot of projects that are tree planting on croplands or pastures, sort of agroforestry projects or perennial tree crop projects, having a choice to make between VM42 and VM47. And on the one hand, we don't want such significant discrepancies in how woody biomass is accounted for in these two methodologies, but we also think there could be more clarity around when one methodology is better suited to a particular project context than another. And we're looking to create a separate guidance document for these kinds of situations that can help inform project components on their decision between two methodologies that could be applicable in a given context.
Okay, thank you,
that's
Jacqueline.
It for me. I'll hand it back to you, Gary.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you so much. Yeah, so mention a few further modifications that are perhaps a bit minor, at least we haven't developed the thinking so much. Yeah, but hopefully they will also help the usability and the just the uptake overall of the methodology. As Jacqueline mentioned, we get a lot of questions related to sampling. And one idea we have that could just help clarify and bring everything together regarding requirements and options is to extract and reorganize the text on sampling design, sampling collection, analysis into a separate, either an appendix or a handbook. We're still also open to ideas. But we think that that could be helpful to have it all in one place and not spread out through different methodology sections. Another thing is to make a template for the model validation report, which is required under quantification approach 1. That's a feedback we've gotten also from the independent modeling experts, that would help streamline the assessments of the model calibration and validations. Another item is to ensure that the current leakage and related baseline procedures do not disincentivize crop or livestock product diversification, which is something that we see in, I would say, most projects, or at least a high number of them. And we want to evaluate options on how to modify the current procedures to ensure that diversification is encouraged, or at least is not hampered. Similarly, with the consideration of periodic fluctuations of stocking rates for projects that include livestock, we know that there are many factors that contribute to these fluctuations that are not related to GHG or really to the intention of project activities, but are rather dependent on market conditions or maybe weather conditions. VM42 needs to do a better job to allow for those fluctuations. And another that's a more minor point, is to have methodology specific procedures for defining emission sources as de minimis and not relying so much on a CDM tool, because those processes with CDM are independent from Verra, and we don't have influence on if a tool is deactivated or if it's updated or when, and we want to get a bit independent of those tools, but rather take the guidance, what makes sense, and if whatever is useful or whatever we require, have it as part of the methodology. And a bit what Jacqueline said on the woody biomass piece is also has that effect, and with the de minimis rules is the same. Further elements that we're still discussing, but are is of very high interest to us, and we also get quite a lot of feedback, is the challenge it is for the current version of VM42 to apply for smallholder based projects or in smallholder based context. Is something that is a very high priority for us at Verra overall, not only with VM42, but agriculture is the sector which has the highest demand, I would say, for smallholder based projects. And VM42 could theoretically have a high potential, but there are so many barriers currently. So we're exploring ideas and options how the uptake could be easier. And that could also entail having different rules in certain things. For example, we're thinking about if there could be a simplified quantification approach for soil carbon. We still need a lot of feedback on that, and we include also some questions around this in the pre-consultation. Regarding additionality, we are seeing some issues for group projects, that there is missing clarity on the guidelines on how instances should be added over time. And in those cases, what are the requirements to demonstrate additionality at validation? So yeah, we want to refine that to make sure there are no discrepancies, and it's also yeah, unambiguous for methodology users, both project proponents and also VVBs. And just want to say as a general comment, so this revision comes well, both from feedback we are getting from project proponents, but also VVBs. Some things are yeah, still like missing clarity on how should they be assessed at different stages, at validation, at verification. And we also get a lot of feedback from our colleagues that are in another department assessing the project. So that all mixed hopefully will give yeah, more streamlining of the methodology use and of the project reviews. That is our aim, and of course of project development. So similarly, another point related to additionality is that we want to ensure, and that's probably through explaining the use of the equation for equation 1, which is the one used for determining the weighted average common practice adoption. We want to make sure that that is only applied when practices are combined on the same land and not on like different parts of the project, but that are bundled within one project area. Another point is to expand the nitrogen management activities. I mean, the activities are non-exhaustive so far in VM42, so theoretically anything that can be justified is allowed, but just like bring more examples within the methodology and expand the quantification for other approaches that are not just a standard reducing the fertilizer rate. And that will include also an option of accounting for upstream emission reductions when it comes to synthetic fertilizer, which that is linked to an update that was, I think, in last year to the VCS standard. Before that was not allowed, but now we have rules in the program, and then we can implement it in the methodology. Yeah, and similarly with kind of coping with the development of the VCS standard, we want to also enhance the clarity regarding baseline reassessment requirements. I mentioned also group projects and adding project activity instances over time, and also a recent yeah, adjustment we had to make, or that was made along with some ICBCM processes regarding the release of chemical pesticides and fertilizers. Okay, yeah, there are other parallel, VM42 is of course not the only methodology in the ag sector. A big parallel development is the methodology for improved management in paddy rice production systems. This is a new Verra-led methodology that is being yeah, worked on in collaboration with TerraCarbon. The public consultation is currently open since last week. This methodology will likely be finalized before VM42, and we just want to make sure that the methodologies are consistent with each other and that there are no overlaps. Yeah, so we're yeah, monitoring. Well, it's also like one team. We're working on both methodologies, but different staff members, and just like staying close touch to ensure that yeah, both methodologies make sense next to each other. The same applies to VM32, which is a methodology for adoption of sustainable grasslands through adjustment of fire and grazing. That is also undergoing a major revision, yeah, toward version 2, and that is externally led completely, was submitted by Soils for the Future, and they're driving this revision. So there was a question also in the chat, which was answered, but I can say a few words here. So we need to see how the revision processes progress like in parallel, and ensure like if there are use cases where yeah, VM0042 does not let me phrase this differently. So basically, currently both methodologies could accommodate grasslands projects if they focus on accounting for soil carbon. And through these revision processes, we want to make sure that if there is a tailored guidance for grasslands, then it wouldn't really be necessary to have that also as an option within VM0042. But we're very much open to discussing these with with project proponents, how they view this, how they view also methodologies in parallel, what are the benefits of having like a grassland specific methodology. And there are also a number of projects that have been running for a long time using VM32 or based in grasslands. And yeah, there needs to be a pathway for those projects. And this revision process, version 2 of VM32, is one option. And as all methodologies, including also this version of version 3 of VM42, each stage of the methodology development, as is defined in the methodology development and review process of the VCS program, undergoes an assessment of should it proceed to the next stage or not. That is valid for all methodologies. Okay, so I think with that, we're ending a little early, but that's good because I think we have quite some questions. And I want to introduce our pre-consultation survey, which is available by following this link or this QR code. And you will also get a link to it with the email where the link to this webinar recording will be shared. We will also post it in LinkedIn, and if we have your email address, we will also send it to you separately. So we really want to make a broad, as broad as possible outreach to get as many answers as we can to this survey. But I want to say the survey is very long. It's about over 60 questions we put together, and I included here the sections we have. And what is very important is all questions are optional. So if you, for example, say, oh, I really want to give input on nitrogen management, but all the others, I don't have time or it's not my expertise, then please just go to the survey link and skip through the questions until you reach the one that you have input to share. And that way we can just collect everything under one place, and that will help us make also the decisions that also Jacqueline was mentioning. How should the draft go, in which direction, what is kind of has more acceptance for one or the other. You can also share ideas. We also welcome whenever you can to provide references to, for example, scientific publications. That will give us a strong basis to have a very, very broad input for this draft of version 3. Great. So this is the last slide. I just want to also, I added here my email address, so please feel free to, if there is anything unclear or you have any feedback on the survey, you can email me anytime. And I think now we can take a couple of questions because I haven't seen the chat in the last minutes. Maybe I'll let Jacqueline take the first questions while I catch up. Is that all right?
Yes, that works for me. I feel like I'm also still catching up here, but I know one place to start would be the blended baseline. A lot of good questions coming in about specifically how it works and if this is a different form of setting the baseline than what exists already. And the short answer is no. So this is not changing how you set the baseline in VM42. You would still need to set a historical look back period of at least 3 years and collect management data from that time period to set up a schedule of activities that is the basis for modeling the baseline going forward. This only changes how the information from the scheduled activities is used to run model simulations that really to run more model simulations. As someone pointed out, it would require more, modeling and computational effort to do this. It is optional, or it would be optional. But the idea is that instead of, running one simulation where maybe the rotation is corn, soy, wheat from the 3 prior years, and you model year 1 corn, year 2 soy, year 3 wheat, year 4 corn, soy, wheat, corn, soy, wheat, and so on. Maybe the farmer is growing corn in year 1 and soy in year 2, but then something happens, terrible weather for wheat, and they grow corn again instead of growing wheat. Now, when you run a simulation in year 3 for the baseline that's wheat, but the project is corn, particularly if you're a project that's crediting every year, it's not really a great comparison for that specific year of SOC impacts, because you're dealing with different roots and crop residues and management practices. And there's a question on, well, can't we just make the project and the baseline crop always match instead of having a blended baseline? But the challenge is sometimes your project activities are changing what it is that you're planting. And the idea of the baseline is that it should represent the business as usual based on what you were doing historically, the assumption of VM0042, that what you were doing historically is indicative of what you would be continuing to do without the project. So when you're modeling a blended baseline, you're not matching the baseline crops to the project crops. That's not what's being introduced here. That's not going to be an option. We're going to continue to set the baseline based on historical crops and management activities. Instead, you would run, in my example, instead of one simulation, corn, soy, wheat, you would run 3, corn, soy, wheat, and so on, soy, wheat, corn, and so on, wheat, corn, soy, and so on. So you have these sort of 3 different threads of your baseline scheduled activities being modeled forward from time 0 to present day. And at present day, you average the SOC output, and that's your baseline value for SOC in that year. And the idea is that it lets you capture the possible outcomes of historic management activities should they have happened in a slightly different order than the exact structure, the exact, timeline of events in the 3+ years preceding the project. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility to have a baseline that's more representative of possible outcomes in the baseline, using this blended baseline approach, to not have to worry about matching your project activity kind of crop rotation to your baseline rotation in order to have more alignment between these impacts on SOC, especially if your whole purpose of your project is to diversify crops or introduce new crops. So really the idea is the only thing that's changing is sort of the number of simulations that you're running, the order of events within your schedule of activities in which you're running those simulations on, and then what you do with the output of all those simulations. You have a lot of different, probably slightly different numbers for your baseline SOC in a given year, and you average them instead of just one simulation with one baseline number. This would be an optional pathway for projects to take, and the considerations the project might weigh on whether or not this is the right path for them is, am I introducing a new crop, or dealing with fallow or something like that? Do I have the computational capacity to do this kind of modeling effort? Am I trying to get annual issuance where this kind of year-over-year variation might feel more impactful on my credit issuance? And one thing we could consider doing in the revisions is a bit of a flow chart to kind of help in that decision-making process. So I think I touched on a lot of different questions there, but that, I guess, like that's the blended baseline in a nutshell. It does not change the baseline setting approach, the historical look back period, the schedule of activities, and how that data gets used in a simulation. It really changes the number of simulations and then what you do with the outputs from those simulations to determine your baseline SOC value in a given year.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Yeah, I see there are a lot of questions around woody biomass. Maybe you can take a look at those while I answer some of these others. So I guess the first one here from Jacob Penner, Felipe Casarim, regarding remote sensing. So yeah, maybe I could have added this to the slide on parallel methodology developments. But there is a module development on use of remote sensing and digital soil mapping. That is so it's a module for VM42 that is under development, and the timeline is probably also a little faster than version 3, although the process for it involves a working group and an advisory group, so that could be adds complexity. The timeline is not entirely under Verra alone. But yeah, definitely we will consider this as well. So well, at least of course referencing that module, but it's of course seen as a whole option. So that will give the quantification approach supported by remote sensing. But as I mentioned, like in all methodology development processes, like each stage, and with this one will be very interesting, like what the feedback will be from the public consultation. And depending on the feedback we get also, there's always the option that Verra says, okay, we need more time, or we need to consult further experts, or we need to wait for more scientific evidence. So yeah, this is all part of their vision. That's why these processes have started, but I cannot say like remote sensing will be allowed from that stage on. We're working on it, we're evaluating it, and it has to follow the process. Yeah, another set of topics here is regarding, let me see. Okay, here, well, this is a question a bit repetitive regarding the version 3 document. So I remind this pre-consultation survey is it's just like a form, Microsoft form, where you can answer specific questions, and in the end there's an open question where you can basically share any feedback you have. So that's the easiest way. Another option is just send me an email. Yeah, that's kind of the immediate action you can do. Another one is to wait until the draft version 3 is posted for public consultation, and there you can also submit comments. So there are really many opportunities in the next months. Let me see if I have this other question. Well, no, okay. Yeah. Okay, yeah, this one on VM22, given that VM22 is being deactivated, will there be an option to do a standalone nutrient reduction project using VM42? That's something we're actually gaining public feedback on. Although I can say already we are of the opinion, and yeah, well, it's a scientific basis, but we're of the opinion that the methodology should the monitoring provided by the methodology should take the connections there are in the natural system or in the agroecological systems as they are. And nitrogen cycling is very linked or tightly linked to carbon cycling. So we don't see currently an option to say we do a purely nitrogen N2O focused or nitrogen reduction focused project without considering SOC completely. That's also one of the reasons there was this clarification to version 1 in August 22 to not have that. However, we do recognize that there are activities targeting only nitrogen management that do not affect soil carbon negatively. So for that, we want to explore what are the options to have a simpler quantification approach, maybe a more standardized, streamlined modeling. We're still learning, we're consulting experts, and we're consulting also you. So yeah, if you're interested in that, please yeah, fill the section of the survey on nitrogen management. And yeah, we're curious to see which ideas you have, which options are scientifically sound. And what we definitely don't want is to take any risks by saying, well, yeah, nitrogen management is not crucial to SOC, so we can just leave that out of the monitoring under certain conditions. We feel that is a very high risk for soil carbon loss. Okay. Yeah, I think those are the ones I had marked for now. I know, Jacqueline, you want to take a few on the woody biomass piece?
Yeah.
Thank you.
The question that stood out to me, there was a question about VM47's limitations on minimum size for use of the area-based methodology or quantification approach, as well as the applicability condition that the census-based approach cannot be used. I guess when you're using the census-based approach, you're not monitoring soil carbon. That's not in the project boundary. Those are both applicability conditions within VM47. And as part of this revision, we want to be adopting applicability conditions for the use of census or area-based approach that are that make sense in the agricultural context. So excluding SOCs, of course, doesn't make sense in a VM42 project where that is the entirety of, you know, a lot of the project activities that you're looking to do to increase the SOC pool. So those are great questions. We're not wholesale adopting VM47 and all of its applicability conditions. Instead, we're using the MRV components of 47 as a launching point for the MRV components that we want to bring into 42, and then establishing VM42 specific applicability conditions on, you know, when not, I guess those different approaches could be used in the VM42 project. We are doing this in close collaboration with Verra's team that has worked on VM47, as well as TerraCarbon's team has worked on VM47. And a lot of the learnings and feedback they've gotten on 47 and these applicability conditions and some of the constraints for that methodology are also informing VM42's kind of adoption of some of those approaches. So those concerns are top of mind, and we want to make sure that we don't, you know, have any holes in VM42 where there's an agroforestry project that doesn't meet any of the applicability conditions and therefore kind of apply woody biomass accounting procedures. So I appreciate the flags on those two issues and other similar constraints that VM47's applicability conditions lay out. There's also a question about if you're doing quantification approach 2 and area-based approach for woody biomass, does that mean you would need to have two separate control plots, essentially one set up for SOC and then one using remote sensing? And that's a really good question. I think we're not in a position to give a succinct and definitive answer on that front right now, as we think about how the two methodologies could come together in like an efficient way that's, you know, for VM42 aligned. But I will say that they're pretty different kind of ways of establishing and monitoring the baseline control site in the two methodologies. So I think it is a possibility that could be the case, but we can't say that for sure right now.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can take a couple of more questions here. There's one regarding the soil sampling depth guidance. And so the minimum reporting is 30 centimeters, but related to the requirements for reporting on an equivalent soil mass basis, there is the recommendation to sample down to 50 centimeters. But it's still very flexible depending on the expected compaction or loosening effects that projects have, depending on their project activities. But we also have that, as you see here on this slide, 0.4, some questions around how, basically how clear, how simple you consider the guidance on equivalent soil mass, and are open also to feedback on how that clarity could improve. And Jacqueline also made the really good suggestion that through these extraction into an appendix or a handbook, the soil sampling guidance will also become more clear, less ambiguous on how to really do things, both in the initial sampling and also in the resampling. Then there's a question here on registration and verification process timelines. So definitely that's a key priority for Verra as a whole, not just for VM42 projects. There has been some restructuring recently also of the program management department. We're increasing capacity, supporting also technically between departments whenever needed. And one big Chris just shared a link. Maybe you can share it in the public chat. One big element we're working on is also digitizing methodologies. That still needs some time, but we're working on that very intensively, or rather not us, but our technology department. And that will hopefully also remove a lot of, let's say, paperwork, digital paperwork, and increase efficiency. So those are all very, very high priorities for Verra. There was also a question on what about projects that are validated under version 2 and when they will need to adapt to version 3. So that follows the rules of methodology updates overall, and that is set by the VCS standard. But first, version 3 has to be finally published. So we expect then that to be, as mentioned, next year, in the first half of next year. But assuming it would be, let's say, April, then from then on, the grace period would start to count. And standard-wise, the grace period is 6 months. So that means projects need to achieve validation with the previous version before that grace period ends. But we also have still now the option to make those grace periods longer, which sometimes is the case if we see validation registration processes are taking too long. Then we set a longer grace period of, for example, 9 months or 12 months. But that will be communicated in due course. But if a project has been validated under version 2, then that is the methodology version that is valid for that project, and the requirement to update to the new methodology version is then only until either baseline reassessment or crediting period renewal, whatever comes first. So I think, with that one, we will close the webinar. As expected, we didn't get to answer all questions, but we can save them. And I guess for a lot of you, we also have like direct email contact. And if we did not answer them and it's a pressing one, then please feel free to email me. And I think some of these will also be able to be covered through the survey, this pre-consultation survey. So please share also the link among your contacts, your network, and give all the feedback you have through this form. Yeah. Okay. With that, yeah, thank you so much, Jacqueline, and also Chris for supporting. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a good rest of your days.